It is said that learning a language is best done as a child, but does that mean that it's too late to learn a new language as an adult? We'll dive into this question and come up with some surprising results, plus talk about some tips to acquire a language, Spanish in this case, as an adult. Hi, my name is Mark of Los Filipinos, and this is part 2 of our episode from last time on tips to learn Spanish. First of all, it turns out that the very idea that it's best to learn a new language during childhood is still debated, not really settled. The problem is that the very idea that you have to learn a new language while still a child, otherwise it's too late, has seeped into the minds of most people. That is actually not healthy, as really, people can and do still learn many other languages even as an adult. What are we talking about here? Well, in an MIT article published in 2018, it says that adept learning happens until age 17 or 18. That's normally what troubles a lot of people. However, in a June 2024 article in National Geographic, the article states that adults actually have a number of advantages to learning a new language. The article further says, research says that adults are better learners at everything because we have a lot of self-regulation and we're very intent when we want to learn something, says Lourdes Ortega, a professor of linguistics at Georgetown University who herself speaks 4 languages. Adults all over the world arrive at different proficiencies, fluencies, capacities for what they want to do with language, but there is no ceiling to it. There is no ceiling. Ortega further says that without the opportunity to be exposed to the language, there's no learning that can happen, early or late. So exposure is quite important. And going from our last video, we must add that it's not just exposure or immersion per se, but constant exposure to comprehensible input that will be vital. As we said last time, grammar should take a backseat to comprehensible input. According to the National Geographic article, the Foreign Service Institute estimates that a native English speaker will be able to learn Spanish or French with 24 to 30 weeks, roughly 7 to 8 months of study. But this requires a stringent study schedule that might be too much for an individual to do on their own. The National Geographic writes, such estimates, meaning of the Foreign Service Institute, reflect a stringent study model with a dedicated number of hours spent practicing for multiple days per week, says Ortega. It's impossible and unlikely to expect one individual to follow such a strict schedule on their own, especially as the rise of language learning apps like Babbel and Duolingo has widened accessibility to foreign education by allowing people the time and confidence to reach certain goalposts at their own pace. Given this, perhaps a more realistic timeline is at least perhaps 1 year, coinciding with some people who have managed to go from level A1 to level B2 in Spanish, as in the case of Emi Grace. And here's a snapshot of her page. However, as can be noted, adults still have to use adult faculties and resources that can be brought to bear to acquire Spanish. That means, as we have mentioned previously, to have a study plan and a schedule to actually study Spanish and not merely rely on intuition per se. There's one more really important ingredient that must be added here, as the National Geographic states. No one can learn as an adult a new language unless they love it and unless they make it part of their life, says Ortega. In theory, it's a great thing, but you need to have reasons for it and the time to invest in it. That said, children and adults do have their own unique strengths and weaknesses when it comes to grasping new connections. Children tend to learn new languages more intuitively, may have more opportunities to play and experiment with new languages, and may be forced to adapt without the aid of translation apps or other resources. Adults can employ custom strategies to hone their language learning experience, like creating their own memorization systems or visualization techniques. Given all these, we put together a quick set of tips to acquire Spanish as an adult. And this serves as part 2 of the tips we already mentioned last time. So tip number 1, go ahead and take the plunge. When I was a kid, I was enrolled in swimming class, and on the very first day of classes, we were allowed to just frolic in the shallow part of the pool at first, and after some time had passed, we were then asked to get out of the water and line up at the edge of the deep end of the pool. Then we were asked to jump one at a time into the deep end of the pool just within arm's length of the edge. And that was the first lesson. No, we weren't taught how to first move our arms or legs or any breathing skills or anything at all. Just jump into the deep end and resurface. Some kids back out at that point, but we just jump right ahead, especially after seeing the first few kids just jump to the pool when their turn came, resurface, and climb up the edge. There seemed to be nothing to it, and true enough, when my turn came, I just jumped and resurfaced. It turns out, we will move rather instinctively to attempt to resurface, and that we are actually buoyant, and even if you didn't do anything and kept still, you would still resurface. Of course, I didn't know the science of that before. It wasn't important at that time. I just knew how to jump into the water and surface all on my own. Did we learn this by reading the books first about science, sports, anything before jumping? Nope. We just learned by doing, and we actually enjoyed jumping into the deep end. So what's the lesson here? The first point here is that there's generally no prerequisite to learning Spanish, and you can go right ahead and take the plunge. You don't need to read grammar books first or anything of that sort. What could be more important is input from listening or reading, especially what's called comprehensible input. We talked about that in our previous episode, so for now, when we say take the plunge, we mean just go for listening or reading input, which is comprehensible input, rather than merely relying on grammar. The second point here is that our innate language abilities will kick in once we set ourselves in motion, in the same way that we have an instinctive sense to surface in the pool, so we just need to take the plunge. For Filipinos, we are normally at least bilingual, speaking a mother tongue in English or Filipino, so we're generally used to learning a different language, so the barrier to learning is not high given our Spanish vocabulary as well. Tip number 2, set goals, make plans, and keep the schedule. Going back to our swimming analogy, taking the plunge is not the same as being ready to participate in Olympic swimming. Taking the plunge simply means letting our innate language abilities to kick in, but after that, there must be a formal structure to get from diving into the deep end of the pool to moving from one side of the pool to the other, which is swimming. Which leads us to asking ourselves, what are your goals? Are you just planning to simply consume Spanish language materials like movies, novels, or history books, like me, for example? Or are you planning to work for the BPO speaking English and Spanish account? Are there technical skills involved, like jargon in Spanish, like if you're into medical transcription, etc.? So it really depends on your goals. And depending on your goals, the intensity and structure of your studies will be different, so you'll have to plan your timelines and study accordingly. And remember that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, as the military says. So be prepared to make adjustments to your plan and evolve it accordingly. So what kind of time frames are we talking about for our plans? Again, it depends. If you're aiming to go from level A1, the most basic, to level B2, the highest intermediate in Spanish, well, some people have done it in 1 year, as already mentioned before. That is, if that is your goal, which need not be the case, especially with this kind of compressed time frame. While it's doable, this can rob you of the pleasure of learning the language. However, understandably, some people are in a hurry and are willing to pay the price. So again, 1 year is doable if you really want to do it. On the other hand, I'll refer you to a video of Steve Kaufman, where he said that roughly the first 3 months is all about connecting with the language, the next 6 months to 1 year is about getting comfortable with the language, then after that, it's lifelong learning. That's how I look at it. And that will be a very good rule of thumb for us Filipinos as well, unless you're really in a hurry. By the way, I dropped some links below if you want to check Steve Kaufman's 3 stages of learning. Finally, as mentioned in our previous video, you have to make that schedule, study a little every day, and maintain that schedule, which will require self-control and discipline, which is something that adults do much better than children. This is the adult part of learning. Tip number 3, keep on moving. It's funny how 1 day of skipping can quickly turn into 2 days, into 3 weeks, into months once you start skipping. And once you lose the discipline, you lose the cadence, and getting back feels like a heavy burden and can be very dispiriting. That's one reason you need to keep at it and keep on moving, as there's a strong chance that you can completely drop it altogether. On the other hand, don't get stuck on one aspect of your study to the detriment of moving on. Don't try to be perfect for each and every study lesson as some sort of end-all or be-all of learning Spanish. No, just follow comprehensible input programs. Once you get roughly 80% of the material, you can already move on and then just try to review in the future. You need to start getting comfortable not knowing each and every word that was said in the lesson, but focus instead on the overall skills and the overall message. And you can just always back review if you want. So think of it as riding a bike. If you stop moving, you fall. So you need to keep on moving while you're just pedaling your bike. Tip number 4, try to get a language parent. A child learns a language from parents even before they go to school. That's a good analogy to use. So by this, we mean that try to get someone who can mentor you, somebody you can emulate and mimic in the target language, and who can be your model and soundboard when acquiring the language. And here, as adults, you can befriend native Spanish speakers who might want to do an intercambio or an exchange with you, Spanish for English and vice versa, or something like that. I know that helped me push my Spanish language skills forward by leaps and bounds, and especially in giving me the confidence to write or speak in Spanish. As language learners, we will make mistakes and we need to learn from it. It's part of the process, so we need that language parent to help us do that. Which brings us to the next tip, tip number 5. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, but focus on communication rather than avoiding mistakes. As adults, we are so self-conscious of making mistakes. We don't want to make fools of ourselves. Unlike when we were kids, we just kept on practicing our language skills because we wanted something done and needed to communicate with each other. We were not really that self-conscious of the mistakes that we were committing, and we just accepted the correction of our parents and the adults in the room. That's because communication was our goal and not showing off our language skills. And here's where that language parent comes in handy. The language parent can correct our mistakes, not because they want to show off that they're better than you, but because they really just want to help you communicate better. In fact, to communicate with them. So the more you communicate with them, with mistakes and all, the more they can help you improve by providing ways to say things better. So remember, we will make mistakes. Accept it. Get over it. Keep on pushing yourselves. It's part of the learning process. So, do you have any other tips you might want to share? Please drop a comment below and let us know what you think. If you found this video useful, please like and subscribe to support our channel. Meantime, that's all we have for now. Ciao, everyone. Viva los Filipinos. Mabuhay.